Welcome to Grid Connections. I'm your host, Chase Drum. On this podcast, we'll be exploring how our electrical grid is becoming the intersection between the next generation of electric transportation, new digital technologies, and grid infrastructure. Join me in exploring these topics with experts and leaders across the grid. In this episode, we discuss current electric vehicle charging technologies with Wade Higgins and Matt Teske. Wade Higgins is the Director of Customer Success at FreeWire Technologies. FreeWire's unique charging technology brings both high-speed charging and battery backup technology into one easy solution. Matt Teske is founder and CEO of ChargeWay. They're helping dealerships and EV drivers learn about new EV technologies and how to find the right charging infrastructure for their car. In today's episode, we'll go through misperceptions about charging networks, how to create awareness of EV charging infrastructure, the role of utilities, and most importantly, where the industry is headed. I'm with Wade Higgins and Matt Teske. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Alrighty, thanks for having me, Chase. My name's Wade Higgins. I'm currently the Customer Success Director for FreeWire Technologies, a company that builds battery-backed EV chargers. Spent most of my career in the automotive industry, did a stint at Tesla, co-founded a company doing software in the EV charging space as well, and I'm currently a fellow at the Clean Energy Leadership Institute.
And I'm Matt Teske. I'm the CEO and founder of ChargeWay. And my background is similar to Wade. I've been in the automotive sector for a long time, but predominantly have worked on new campaigns and marketing and messaging and communications for automakers and auto dealers and new vehicle launch programs with brands such as General Motors and Toyota over the years. I've done some work with Tesla a little bit over the years as well. And now with ChargeWay, we're looking to, again, keep things simple for how we engage with the public for where we're going with the new fuel type. So thanks for having me.
Definitely my pleasure. And like I said, I've really enjoyed the conversations I've had with you guys in the past on the topics. So with that, I've got this outline here of a few different things to go over. And I think given both of your backgrounds, especially where you're working, Wade at FreeWire, and of course, Matt, what you're doing at ChargeWay, this unto itself could easily be a topic for a couple hours, but I would love to discuss with you some of the immediate misconceptions that you've experienced about charging infrastructure. I know even driving an electric vehicle and just talking to people who are curious but don't know much, they've had their own. So would love to hear from you guys. What are the ones that you still hear the most and are pretty quickly, I don't want to say explained away, but once reality meets the expectation, it doesn't seem as big of a problem as people once thought.
Yeah. I would say, Chase, the biggest thing that people still cite as a problem or a barrier to getting an EV is charging times. And, I think it's pretty easy for people to look at, say, 8 hours, I'm used to a 5-minute fill up. That just doesn't work for me. And I think that 8 hours or however long it is really needs some context. Matt, I think you can go to a lot further detail than I can about the fuel education piece. But this whole gas mentality of you're going about your driving and then you have to deviate off your route to go somewhere to refuel, and that takes X amount of time. That whole way of thinking about refueling just doesn't apply to 99% of EV charging. I use a 110 volt outlet to charge my car at home, and technically that would take more than 24 hours to fully charge my car, but I can get 40 or 50 miles overnight recharging in 10 hours. And guess what? I typically don't drive more than 40 or 50 miles in a day. So that 8 or 10 hours isn't a problem for me whatsoever. And people say, a 30-minute or 1 hour fueling time at a fast charger out there, that's just way too long. The number of times I've actually genuinely needed to use that, I can borderline count on one hand. And I've been driving an electric vehicle since 2014. I think probably one of the best ways for people to get over a lot of these is to just live with an EV, just experience it, use it for your daily drive for a day, a week, any amount of time. I have a small company on the side where I rent out electric vehicles, and I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally helped sell somebody on getting an electric car because they just used it in their daily life. and they're like, oh my God, this charging thing, I can do it at home, I can do it at work, I can do it at the grocery store while I'm there. It just, the whole mindset of how you refuel is different with EVs. And I think, as Matt, I'm sure you're about to say, like, once you start doing it and you realize all the different places there are to charge, it's more convenient than gas, not less.
Well, yeah, actually, the word you just used at the end, the convenience element of it, is I think that most people don't realize, because there's let's kind of take a step back, is average people don't know what they don't know. And they make assumptions. And the aspect of convenience is something that it doesn't cross their mind about the concept of they can fill up at home when their car is just sitting for 10 hours. And that's a massive element of convenience. Now, that's for the 50% of the United States that has a home with a garage or a driveway. And that's, that's kind of the balancing act of, it's not a one size fits all user experience with electric fuel, as we call it at Chargeway, is because you still have to understand what the use case is for each person. So we're going to, I think, gradually chip away at the mass market for how people can see how they can fit it into their life. But the assumptions most people come in with is that it is like gas. It's, every connector is the same, every station is the same, the speed should be the same, all those basic things that they have gotten conditioned by with gasoline for decades. And that's a huge psychological and educational barrier that we need to bring down to earth, because, to your point, it'll immediately scare them off if they hear 30 minutes or an hour or a day or God knows what. And that's a big part of what we're looking at is they don't even realize they have a fuel choice, because it's just very clear. I mean, Ford did a study last fall where 42% of respondents, when asked, how do you fill up an electric car, they said with gas. I mean, so we've got this.
Yeah, I heard about that.
It's terrible. So, I mean, and so I look at that and I say that's the evidence there, is that we've spent a lot of time on trying to get people to think about electric cars, but the product that they're actually changing over to using is electric fuel. And how do we bring that down to earth for the complexities that do exist within it, that, physics we can't fight? And how do we help people understand how that fits into their routines? That's a big part of what we're focused on. So, yeah. So to your point, Wade, my wife uses a level 1 at home constantly because she doesn't drive, near enough to need anything more than that at home. And again, our use cases, we fill up at home all the time. But you need to then be able to balance out what can my car do compared to what can each station do for my needs, and making that so simple that people cannot goof it up. Otherwise, they'll just default to saying, I get regular gas right now and I don't have to think about it. And that's the challenge we have.
Yep.
With charging where it is right now, I think one of the great things that I like about the Chargeway app, or a lot of the tools out there, is, and it kind of goes at it, it's like, where are these charging stations? Where can you find them? And I think a big visualization is when they can actually see that they are everywhere. They might not always have the big orange shell, or I guess that's 76, orange 76 right next to the highway. But as far as like the day-to-day, you never need it. It's kind of like leaving the house with a fully charged phone every day. Yeah. They usually die, but with the cars, I've never had that issue. Mm-hmm. And that's where I know that's kind of been a big talking point for a lot of people in the EV spaces. There needs to be better signage.
Yeah.
And I think that is true. However, I think it was Fourth recently had someone on in one of their webinars talking, and for people who don't know, Fourth it's kind of a local, I guess they're no longer local, they're all over the US, but a nonprofit that's kind of helping build awareness for electric vehicles. And one of the things that this study from people in Berkeley had said was, I believe it was Berkeley, it was somewhere from the Bay Area, that essentially over the last 10 years, awareness of even electric vehicles in general hasn't grown. And so I'm always trying to figure out ways to really build that awareness just beyond, here's a couple of signs. And I think sometimes that might be the bigger issue, and would love to hear if there's anything you guys have seen to kind of help change the mindset, or just really change the conversation in a way that really stands out.
No, actually, I think the study you're referring to is probably the UC Davis study.
I think that's it.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it was between 2014 and 2017 that the amount of public available charging stations in California doubled, but the percentage of people that felt that there was not enough infrastructure for EVs in California also doubled. Yeah. And so if you build it, they will come mentality clearly isn't working, because we have to ask ourselves, what are we trying to convince people to do? And I think, to your point about the study from UC Davis, is the fact that if we pretend that putting a charging station into a parking lot that's the size of, I don't know, a phone booth or a lunchbox even, is the equivalent of putting in a fueling station that's the size of a city block on a corner, then we're already screwing up, because the visibility of fuel is the problem. Is there's two products we all purchase every time we buy a car that runs on gasoline, the car itself and the gas. We don't think about the gas because it's just waiting in the background, and we've seen it everywhere.
Infrastructure's existed for decades.
Yeah, it's ingrained into society, and that's how we understand fuel. And so that's a huge, huge psychological barrier. That's why I don't think it works too well to try to explain an electric car like a cell phone. Oh, you just plug it in, because people then have the exact response that you did, which was, well, my phone can die. Right. But my car, if I put it filled with gas, it doesn't die unless I'm an idiot. I mean, that's kind of how people think of it. So
it's funny you should say that. I had a really funny experience recently. Kind of going off of that, I also have a Subaru Outback that I usually drive my dogs around in.
That comes standard with all Portland residents,
right? Yeah. I haven't heard that before, Wade. That's original.
I had an Outback when I lived in Portland too.
I know.
It's a two-way street.
I'm pretty sure you don't even get tax rebates or anything anymore. This, like, once you do your taxes, they give you either an Outback or an Impreza, depending. But no, so yeah, hashtag Portland problems. But no, I took it to the gas station, paid $40, and then drove away. And I was like, oh, the gas light is still saying it's empty. Ended up taking a Subaru, got a loaner car, and then the whole time it turned out they had charged me $40 and never filled the tank.
Oh, because they were filling it for you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought there was a glitch with the actual. No, I mean, yeah, I guess that's something else to clarify. In Oregon, people pump the gas for you, and they kind of change it for with COVID going on. But the place I was at was the person comes out and actually still pumps it for you. And so I drove off, assuming because the gas light still wouldn't go off, that there must be an issue with the car and not the charging infrastructure of the gas station. So it's kind of like this weird, are there problems? Yes. Are there problems with the current status? Yes. And I do think it's kind of that, like I'm sure you guys have always heard it, but it's that analogy of like horses. Before the cars were a thing, how would you describe a better way to get around? And people would say,
horse.
A faster horse that eats less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and doesn't poop or bite you.
Right. Well, yeah, no kidding. And so it's just like, it was this really weird and oddly, like, one, I kind of felt dumb, but two, just like surreal experience. So like, okay, is this what we've known? Yeah. Is it easier? Not really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll be honest.
That was a fluke. That's the first time I've had that happen or heard it happen to someone else. But okay.
I think the thing that because Oregon obviously being unique, and same with New Jersey, they pump gas, is that there's a lot of Oregonians that may not fundamentally understand that process, right? But the other 48 states, they get it. I think the one thing that's interesting about gasoline and just the experience of using it is that you as a driver predominantly you have control of it by sake of the fact that you choose. I get this. I went to there. I can manipulate the situation, and I can do it myself, and it's simple and it's fast, and I'm willing to pay for that convenience. That's the difference, is even the comparison of like electricity is much cheaper than gasoline. A consumer that isn't fundamentally interested in changing over to a new fuel type, they're going to ask the same questions, which is, okay, is it as fast? And depending on which station you're at or what car you're driving, the answer is, well, maybe not. And then they'll immediately have the retort of, well, then I'll keep paying for convenience. Mm-hmm. That's how consumers think.
Yeah. So I guess looking at where EV charging is headed, does that really mean there's much need for like level 1, level 2 outside of like personal homes and maybe at work? Yeah. Is really DC fast charging? I mean, that seems to be where people are having these issues. Like, where do you guys see kind of the future of EV charging? Is it that? Is there the possibility of battery swapping coming back or something like that?
So I think, Matt, you really eloquently put that gas and the infrastructure and the way we think about fuel and the way we think about refueling has been ingrained in many decades, more than a generation of Americans. And so we have this standard that we think about. And with EV charging, I don't think that necessarily there needs to be this same overarching single solution that works the same for every car and every person. DC charging is obviously substantially faster than AC. There's no question about that. But depending on where you live and what infrastructure you have available to you, it might be largely irrelevant. Like I've used superchargers. I've used other DC fast chargers for non-Tesla EVs as well, but I've never had to rely on that as my main form of refueling. I'm lucky in that I live in California, where we have really phenomenal infrastructure almost everywhere. There's 3 superchargers within a 5-mile radius of my house. I work for a company that builds EV chargers, so I have free charging here at work. I have a 110 in the garage. Like, I have lots of options.
So what you're
available.
saying is you're not the normal car driver.
No, not at all.
So,
but
and I guess that does come to the question: is all 3 of us live in the asterisk states, as I call them, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's what people do. You can drive an EV. It's a thing. There's charging everywhere.
But Chase, I think that any of the 3 different refueling paradigms that I just mentioned there could work as someone's sole means of recharging. If you have a 240 volt outlet at home, that's probably going to work for you 99.9% of the time. If you have a level 2 charger available at your workplace, that's probably going to work for you 99% of the time. If you need to rely on public DC charging on a regular basis, I actually think that's probably the least convenient, most problematic of the 3 refueling archetypes, but it works. I mean, I have a friend who doesn't have charging at home, doesn't have charging at work, and pre-COVID, he was commuting 108 miles a day in his Model S. So he was literally using a supercharger every day. But did he ever get stranded? No. Did he ever not make it to his destination, do what he needed to do? No. So you really do get there's no broad stroke that's a one-size-fits-all answer, I think, here going forward. One thing that, sort of tying in what we were talking about just before this as well, one thing that I think could help a lot of people get further into this is that, FreeWire is specifically building a fast charging station that's designed to go at gas stations. And I think that, talking about how well things are advertised, if you start to see EV charging stations at gas stations, that might spark a conversation for a lot of people to get an EV who would otherwise be totally uninterested or actually be skeptical of it happening. And again, once you own an EV, you start to learn all of these things that we're discussing that all of us as EV drivers have known for years already. And I feel like if somebody, used a fast charger at a gas station even a couple times, they'd start to realize maybe actually this isn't the best way to refuel my vehicle. So I think
that's an interesting. No, that's completely valid. That kind of gave me an idea though, like going off that, Matt, given you're having more of the marketing background and you probably have some of these conversations as well. Mm. Have you had any discussions with like a gas company or a chain that would be, marketing, eventually brands do have to rebrand. And if you've already got like the Shell or the 76, maybe you turn the 7 of 76 into like a lightning bolt or something to kind of re-clarify your service offerings.
I
don't know if that's ever come up. Maybe that's just me being kind of crazy.
No, I've had conversations with and Chargeway. We've had conversations with energy companies about, they call themselves energy companies, but we know what that actually means. Yeah. But I will be honest, I'm not the first proponent for gas station installations for fast charging, unless it's 350 kilowatt or higher, or level 7 as we would call it in Chargeway. Because if you are, then you're taking the Coke versus Pepsi challenge, and you've got a wide mass market that's been drinking Coke forever, and you're rolling in with Pepsi. And if Pepsi isn't as good as or better, they will sit and watch what's going on and say, okay, I just filled up my gas-powered car in 10 minutes. But if that station over there is, let's arguably say 120 kilowatt for level 6 in Chargeway, and it takes 30 minutes to charge up to what you really need to move on to your next destination, if you're like leapfrogging to other fast chargers, we're talking a disparity of potentially 20 minutes. And then you'll have this again, that's a visualization for people that are not familiar with electric cars to see. And if it's a super high powered, fast charger, like a level 7 in Chargeway, and you're getting in and out in 15 minutes, arguably you start to have a conversation of, hey, that thing is fast. That car's faster than your car. And I just filled up basically as fast as your gas car. And you want to go for a ride really quick, or you want to see how fast my car is? Then you start having a really balanced conversation. But this notion of, I'm not a huge proponent for that, because I feel like it's going to set up the EV conversation for setting up a bad experience just as a first impression. It's like, oh wow, you've been sitting here for, like, I pulled up with my gas car, you were already plugged in charging, I'm already done filling up, and you're still sitting there. That's a bad marketing tactic. That means that you will have someone walk away from that saying, see, took too long. I didn't even want to hear your conversation to why it matters in one way or another. I'm leaving now. And that's the problem. That's what we're fighting.
So with 350 kilowatt, where do you see that like really being unlocked? Because as far as I know, there are no current cars that can handle that kind of speed. And I think they're on the horizon and the technology is theoretically there.
Yeah.
What do you think? Yeah. There's a huge difference even between 120 kilowatt and like 200, 250.
Oh yeah.
And I would say even at 250, you're pretty, depending on the car, you're pretty close to being there.
Yeah.
What do you think is the missing? Is it concerns and interest from automotive? Is it a more similar architecture? I think the buzzword I keep hearing, and I'm still like skeptical of it, is people keep talking about 800 volt architecture for EVs.
Yeah.
And I really think that's more of a marketing thing, just kind of like how megapixels was for cameras. It doesn't really mean anything. It just sounds cool.
Well, it's
because everyone knows more horsepower. So more volts must be more charge, right?
That's unquestionably true.
Yeah.
I have a sort of deep engineering lens on a lot of what you just mentioned. And there is one 800 volt architecture vehicle out there already, the Porsche Taycan.
Yep.
It's not a mass market car because the cheapest version is $106,000. So, it's not.
They have payment plans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one kidney, two kidney.
Yeah. I'll trade my home for this Porsche.
Yeah.
We're still in very early days for 800 volt architecture. Doubling the voltage will unquestionably allow faster charging times as well. But, at the end of the day, the number of kilowatts you're talking about is always going to be volts times amps. And so to get to really high speed, if you're not doubling the voltage, because with the exception of the Porsche, every EV out there runs at 400 volts right now. There's a lot of research behind that. There's a lot of established manufacturing behind that. Like 400 volt EVs are going to be the common type of EV for at least the next 5 to 10 years, possibly longer than that.
Yep.
And so, at 400 volts,
that's still an insane amount of power.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Yeah.
But at 400 volts to hit 250 kilowatts, you're talking about more than 600 amps of current.
This is also a lot.
And that's just insane. The cooling requirements, the cabling requirements to do 600 amps for 30 seconds, let alone 5 or 10 continuous minutes, are just, from an engineering perspective, are just wild. And so 800 volts,
is it really that different with 800 volts? Like, because even when you start looking from another engineer perspective, you're still going to have to deal with a lot of other similar things.
You are, but 800 volts, 800 volts are expensive right now because very few people have done it. It's basically just the Volkswagen Group at this point who have done it.
Right.
There's a few heavy duty trucking applications where 800 volts exists, but we're in the hyper early days of 800 volts. You can cut the current in half. That's going to make cooling requirements a lot easier. That's going to mean cabling. You don't have to have cables that are the size of fire hoses to handle, just an insane amount of current. So there's a lot of engineering challenges associated with all of that. And another thing that I see in industry as well, and I know both of you guys are experienced marketers, and I have nothing against marketing people, and I've done marketing myself as well, but I do frankly see a lot of marketing BS out there where people are like, we're going to be able to hit 600 kilowatts within the next few years. And I look at the details, and that the way they arrive at 600 kilowatts is 1,000 volts times 600 amps. And it's like, what EV runs at 1,000 volts? Oh, right. None of them.
Yeah.
What car can handle 600 amps? Right. None of them. So, I see a lot of these huge numbers, 350.
Well, I guess that kind of goes back to what I'm wondering though, is like, is it even necessary?
I don't think so. And I'm happy to extrapolate on that a little bit more, but just from an engineering perspective, getting to some of these crazy high numbers, even 350 kilowatts, like the actual, electrical engineering and physics required to do it is immensely challenging. And as you already mentioned, Chase, the number of vehicles out there that can actually accept anywhere close to that amount of power, like the vehicles are not there yet. They will
Yeah,
come.
I mean, the closest things even plus 200 that I know of are the Taycan and then also the Teslas.
That's it. And granted, there's a lot of Teslas out there, but I do think there is this really intense marketing push. Well, I can do 350 kilowatts. Well, I can do 370. Well, I can do 400.
Totally. It seems like the megapixel race of cameras.
Yeah,
it really means nothing, but it sounds cool.
No, and as a marketer, it pisses me off to no end when that kind of crap happens, because it's just fluff for fluff.
Yeah.
They're just I'm going to grab a big number and, ooh, isn't this exciting? Yeah. And the answer is to a driver. At the end of the day, they're not thinking that deep into it. And if you want to throw a big number at them, they're going to go, great. What does it mean for my driving experience?
Most drivers have no idea what that means. That's a really good point, Matt.
Yeah. And it's honestly, credit to Tesla is they have hidden all of it. One of my favorite phone calls I was ever on is I was talking to a major network, and we were discussing ChargeWay and how the leveling system works and why it helps to simplify what we're talking about so that you can hand it to an auto dealer or a friend and they can talk about, I get the fact that level 5 is less than level 6. And they kept really discussing deeply, kilowatt is, they got to know what the maximum kilowatt is. And there was some intern on the phone that goes, Tesla just dropped using all their numbers to identify their cars. Now they're just calling them long range and standard range. Yep. Everybody got silent. And all of a sudden someone's like, wait, they did what? And I said, yeah, that's because they figured it out. Yep. They not only did they have the right ecosystem on how to build the right products that could interact with one another, charging and car, but they did cater to that early adopter mindset, focused on some of the technology with 70D, 100D on down the line. But you hand a Tesla to Bob and Jane that know nothing about the engineering.
They don't care about cars either.
They don't care about cars. They're just like, standard range, long range. Oh, I want the long one, honey. That'd be great. Okay, we're going to go charging. Where are we going to charge at? Well, you could go to your destination charger when you arrive, or you could go to a supercharger on the way. Yeah. And it's like, it's the Disney approach to saying this is how it works. And so, our conversation about amps and volts and kilowatts, I mean, we can all go round and round about it, but
we're nerds. We care about that.
Totally.
That's not mass market information whatsoever. You're totally right. The Bob and Jane example, they don't know how many horsepower their car has. They don't know, how many kilowatts it charges at. They don't care. Like
Well, and that's why
it's not really even different once again than gas. I mean, it used to be leaded. Then I'm like, oh, that's real bad. Now it's unleaded, and they still call it unleaded, even though it's a regular or whatever. And regular
plus
really
and supreme, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, we did it. We did a study at auto shows, basically as part of our original research for ChargeWay, because we would go into rooms with engineers at utilities and automakers and networks, and we would tell them why we were developing what we're developing. And they just kept saying, no, but it's kilowatts. You have to tell them it's the kilowatts. You have to tell them it's a CHAdeMO. And I said, no, you don't. And so we finally proved by just surveying hundreds and thousands of people to say, what kind of car do you drive? Oh, I drive a Subaru Outback. Okay, when you go to the gas station, what kind of gas you get? First word that comes to your mind. 72% of respondents use the word regular. Another 21% use the word premium. And that's all they know. And then when you ask them, by the way, do you know what octane number you use? First, can you tell me? And they'd go, 60 something. I mean,
it's 87 or 91.
Right.
But it went all over the map. And then if someone got the number right, we'd have a follow-up and say, oh, can you tell me what 87 means? They'd go, well, yeah, regular. Mm-hmm. So what we found was that gas stations for the last 40 years literally could have been cherry, apple, banana at the gas station. So, I mean, that's
interesting. I like that analogy. Yeah.
So this is
who does this fall to then? Is it the automakers? Is it the charging infrastructure? Or I think all three of us have had these conversations independently, but now is it like the utilities? Do they now become the new Texacos? Are they interested in doing that? Or who does this opportunity to fall to? And obviously the vertically integrated model worked really well for Tesla and kind of get launched, but like for it to even continue to hit any of these numbers that car companies are talking about, they have no interest, it seems like, in the charging infrastructure or getting the numbers up.
The people
it's also a chicken and egg thing, but I feel like where's the opportunity there? Is it like a utility to say, hey, we make money selling electricity, we already invest hundreds of millions in infrastructure anyway. We can just plug a couple of these up and down I-5 where we have these massive power lines.
Yeah, it's not that simple.
Yeah,
Well, no, I'm not saying it is,
Yeah.
but like it's a lot simpler for them to do it than Ford or.
Well, Wade can probably speak to this.
To give you a little background, Chase, investor-owned utilities are actually regulated on how much money they're allowed to make.
True.
And so
that's valid. Yeah, good point.
selling more electricity does not necessarily mean making more money for them. Like asset utilization or the need to spend money on additional infrastructure or upgrading existing infrastructure, that's what they're interested in. And that's why they like EV charging, is it's going to require a shitload more copper in the ground. Yeah. And those are upgrades that they want to make anyways. Now they have a better justification to do it. Yep. There are some private utilities out there where the more kilowatt hours of electricity they sell, the more money they make. That is true in some places, but the utilities all know at the end of the day, the electricity is coming from them. So it doesn't really matter if they install the charger or not. They're still providing the electricity. Yep. So, some more progressive utilities are more interested in this because they can see some advantages in the bigger picture and they're a little bit more nuanced and sophisticated about it. But others aren't. Who are going to be the new Texcos?
Those are great points. And I am curious, like, given that you actually work on the infrastructure side of it, Wade, where are you seeing like the demand? I mean, you don't have to say specifics, but like, is it automakers? Is it private industry? It sounds like you've had some interactions with utilities, though minor. Like, again, who fixes this kind of missing link problem to?
I don't know that it's a one size fits all. Existing infrastructure companies out there, not infrastructure companies, charging networks. They want to expand their customer base. Matt, you interact with car dealers on a pretty regular basis. I'm sure ChargePoint, EVgo, Electrify America, all of them would love to have access to customers at the point of sale. So immediately it's ingrained in their mind out of the gates of, I have an electric car, where do I go to refuel it? I go to Electrify America, I go to ChargePoint, I go to EVgo, insert here. Like, there's a number of networks out there who I think are interested in installing infrastructure.
So I hate to ask you, but why do they not do that? Because I'm even thinking about the most recent experience I had when I had to buy that Outback, and they were trying to hook me up with some insurance company. I mean, it sounds no different. Like they're trying to figure out upsells, and that's where dealerships make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems like if Subaru or whichever XYZ company partnered with EVgo, Charge Connect, long list of them, Electrify America. There could be some pretty quick and easy upsell opportunities that would benefit the dealer and the end driver.
There are some partnerships with OEMs broadly, but the last time I worked with a company that interacted with a dealership was 2015. So Matt is going to be able to answer this question a whole lot better than I can.
Yeah, well, the networks. There's a combination of things that have happened, especially in the last 5 years or so. Which is there have been networks that have aligned with OEMs. ChargePoint, as an example, with General Motors. A lot of original volts and bolts that were purchased, you would have a ChargePoint card like inside your glove box as part of a promotion. But again, that's one network out of a dozen or more that are now nationally used. Also, the interoperability element of networks aligning to say you can use EVgo, for example, saying you can use the EVgo app to activate a ChargePoint station, like those types of things. So these are all things that they've been working to collaborate on. But at the end of the day, bluntly, the networks are all vying for market share, as Wade said. Yeah. So as much as you might even go to a conference and see representatives from each network on a single panel talking about infrastructure, at the end of the day, when they all walk off,
with each other.
Yeah, they'll hamstring each other left and right for contracts with utilities to get a station put in somewhere. They're all vying for that footprint. The oddity of it is for all the grief that dealers get for being middlemen, and people go, I just want to go straight to the source. Sorry, that's what networks are. They are the exact same thing for electric fuel. Yeah. So and the oddity of that then is who controls the conversation, as you've asked, Chase. And my 2 cents, frankly, is who answers these questions. It is the energy sector. It is utilities. But to Wade's point is if it's an IOU, an investor-owned utility, they are basically hamstringing themselves for how much they can do from a motivational perspective. Yep. It's like, sure, okay, fine. On top of which, even if a utility, an IOU says, we're going to put in a boatload of infrastructure, how many networks have been suing utilities saying, you just basically created a monopoly in your service territory and we have charging stations there. You're basically pushing us out of your service territory, so we're going to sue you. It is a combination of nightmarish elements like that happen in the background that consumers are on the receiving end of. And
Right.
it's the really motivated consumer that wants to go through all that garbage to figure out how to then engage with it. And so my 2 cents is who changes the narrative. Automakers, they'll build any car that runs on anything: gas, natural gas, electricity,
Unicorns,
hydrogen.
you name
Yeah,
it. Yeah, whatever.
unicorn
Farts,
tears. Yeah, farts.
specifically,
Yeah. They don't care. If you go to a Chevy dealer and you want an electric car, if the sales rep doesn't know how to talk about electricity as a fuel type, they will try to get you into a Chevy because they sell Chevys. And so it's not that they hate electric cars, it's that they have a job and they like making a living. It's not that they have a bend against like, I hate EVs. It's like, no, it's just that these people are on one little element conversation about, I got to just do what my job is to put you into a Chevy. And if you want an electric one and I am not comfortable selling it to you, I'll just get you into whatever I can. And therefore, who answers the question about how you talk about the fuel? It's whoever makes it. And I'm sorry to all the fossil fuel providers out there, but you might be energy companies now, but the reality is you are not making the electricity. And so honestly, utilities are the gatekeeper to solving this problem on a larger scale, in my opinion.
And to swing back to something we mentioned earlier, Matt, like I know that there's pros and cons of having EV chargers at gas stations out there. The vast majority of gas stations out there, they don't make their money on the fuel. They make their money on the marked up Pepsis, Red Bulls, and Snickers. And so in that regard, a lot of gas station owners, or in the UK, forecourt owners, they actually love the idea of putting in EV chargers because the dwell time is going to be longer. So the customer has longer sitting there looking at the slushy machine to think, I'll pay $4 for that.
I should have a third slushy. No, I totally agree with you on that. And from a marketing perspective, get the dollars in the door, it makes perfect sense. So as someone as a business owner, I would say, yeah, shit, why not? We could put in 150 kW. Let's make it 100 kW.
Yeah.
I mean, but then what it does to those in the EV space that want to accelerate EV adoption and consumer perception around why it's a great choice is it becomes it's a counter to that. It's then you're positioning two products side by side, one of which from a convenience perspective is far more convenient if you just want to get back in the car that moves you quicker. And so it's in that sense, you're fighting business wanting to just make money, and you're also fighting consumer perception psychology. There's a lot going on there. So
while we're on the subject of refueling and getting back in your car and getting on the road faster, I have a maybe controversial point, and that's that I think 150 kilowatt fast charging is fast enough. I do not think there is a real need for faster than that. Obviously, tons of companies are pushing both the engineering boundaries to actually make that happen, and then there's a lot of marketing companies who are pushing fluff bullshit as well.
So I think to be honest with you, I really don't disagree, but I would say that is on like the lower threshold. Like 150,
to be fair,
it makes it work. But
most non-Tesla fast chargers out there are only 50 kilowatts right now.
Totally.
And those do need to become faster. But, I've charged at a wide variety of speeds out there. And I honestly think, this is just my personal opinion from my personal experience, I think 150 kilowatts is fast enough.
Well, I don't disagree with that either. I think just to put it in context for people who don't understand what 150 kW means.
Good point.
Level 6.
Yeah, I mean, for example, it's like, okay, I've been on the road for like 3 hours. I go get something to eat, something to drink. And most of the time, my experience, if you're at 150 kW,
20 minutes.
Maybe once I've done like whatever I need to do, maybe I'm working or like I need to hang out like another 5 minutes, if that. And that way, anyway, I'm like, oh, I got to shoot a couple of texts to so-and-so. So it's like, you're right. I think 150 kW. And to be honest with you, even like once you get 200, 250, there've been times where I've seen
it's too fast.
It almost is, which I'm not going to say no to it.
I'm not either, but I've
yeah.
experienced the same thing, Chase, where I pulled up and there was a convenience store a block away. And I go to the convenience store and I'm not even done checking out. I haven't swiped my credit card yet to buy the snacks I was going to get for the road. And my car's already like, you have 250 miles of range ready to go. And I'm just like, I'm not ready to go yet.
Yeah.
Right. I would say, I think, yeah, 150 is certainly more than adequate. I mean, again, especially if you're road tripping, it's the element of you don't own a house, so you can't charge at home. Your workplace doesn't have charging.
Totally.
What's your option then? And then it becomes a little bit more of a, oh, okay, I would rather maybe still want to have something more convenient. But this is where I think we're building into that process of phasing EVs into society with basically who it works with best. And unfortunately, yes, that does mean people that are in a position where they actually can charge at home. And so the inconvenience of charging doesn't feel that way because they always leave with a full charge. And then if they do go on a road trip, there's enough genuinely fast charging infrastructure now that if you're driving the right car, to your point, Wade, it's 20 minutes maybe, and then you're back on the road. And for my experience, for what I do with my car, that works absolutely perfectly. And I don't give it a second thought. But that, again, if I didn't have a house that I could fill up at every single night, then I'd be like, that still may not be perfect.
Yep.
So
which EV do you have again, Matt?
I have a Model 3 and my wife has a Bolt.
Okay. All right, cool.
Yeah. And so we road trip in my car because it's just more practical from a fast charging perspective.
Yep.
But both of them are awesome cars for what they offer in the sense that, they both go over 200 miles easily.
Yeah.
And so, I think that the hard part is gases fit everybody's use case, whether you were living in your mom's basement and you parked around the corner, or you had a mansion and you own 7 cars. Gas works for both those use cases from a convenience perspective very well in most people's minds. The inconvenience is I have to go get my fuel. The more that we can help people understand that they really can own their fuel and if they do have the ability to say, I park at home and I can control this, I think that's a huge, huge selling point.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the missed opportunity right now to help accelerate the industry even a nice chunk forward, is there are so many people that have the disposable income and places to park that could be buying these cars left and right, and they just don't seem to yet understand the benefit of that.
I've seen so many folks who put solar panels on their roof and started to think just a little tiny bit about energy independence. And they're like, wait, I'm generating all of this clean, free electricity. I should get a car that uses this. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had a solar panel owner where they're like, I should get an EV. And I'm like, yes, absolutely you should.
Yeah. Well, if you live in places like Arizona or Southern California,
seriously,
man, there's no one should have a house that doesn't have solar on it. And so again, so all this conversation, what are we talking about? We're talking about energy education.
Yeah.
And my father's an engineer, and he and I sat and had long conversations about this. And as a marketer, I kept saying, okay, what bare minimum to be dangerous, what do people need to know? And to at least not make a mistake with how they're going to fill up their car, for example, using electricity. And we went through conversations back and forth, and he just kept saying, he's like, until it's dummied down to the point where someone who says, I used to get regular, but now I go get whatever that new phrase is. Tesla's the only example because they created that Apple-esque ecosystem that you can't goof it up unless you try. So.
Yeah. So I've got a question for you. Since you own, were you with your wife did you guys buy the Bolt together, or was she at the dealership when she bought it?
We were there together. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just curious of your experience. So one of my kind of amusing, or what I found really amusing, is when GM had their big presentation recently on this Ultium kind of style battery and kind of platform they're moving to. One of the analogies they used is like, okay, we're going to be the Android of the industry, which I thought was like, well, yeah, that's great, but if you're hardware and Android, no one makes money on those. Like,
but from a hardware perspective,
if anyone's like an investor
Volkswagen
in that company and knows that space, I was like, that is like a terrible, I get what you're trying to say,
right?
But like profits are terrible in that space. Usually there's a couple exceptions, but far and wide. So like kind of going off that, if Tesla's Apple and the Bolt is the Android experience, like through the buying purchase, and it sounds like for you overall, like it has been pretty good day to day. Like have you actually seen that? Is that kind of a marketing difference, or is it really just, it doesn't really matter the car, you just need to know?
Oh, in that sense, I mean, to be perfectly honest, from an OEM perspective, the only other OEM that's in my opinion is attacking the customer and user experience in a way that will actually compete with Tesla is Volkswagen.
Gotcha.
And every other brand is still kind of reaching for what their commentary and narrative is going to be. But let's be honest. I mean, they are the best example of Tesla I heard that it was, I forget which article I read about this, but the gentleman said, he's like, I kept getting wrong with who I was comparing them to, but I finally realized that they're the General Electric of the 21st century. They're going to touch everything. They're going to touch
Right.
medical devices, energy, transportation, all these different sectors. And they're doing it in a very exciting way. GE has kind of always been in the background, right? Like, oh, that's a GE engine or something, and you don't even really think about it. But Tesla's done it in a very brand excited way. And these other automotive companies, they are just automotive.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're really trying to figure out how to play in this space. And unfortunately, they've just defaulted to saying, like, again, well, somebody else figures out the fuel. Somebody else figures that out. And they're still doing that, aside from Volkswagen with Electrify America. But even that.
But even then, they were forced to do that. They
Right.
didn't voluntarily do that.
Right. No, honestly, they are benefiting from the fact that they got caught and reprimanded. They are benefiting from that, honestly, in a big way. And they're
future, yeah.
Yeah, and they're leveraging it in ways I think that will be smart. But I mean, yeah, candidly, until they embrace a new approach to how they see themselves as a product and as an entity, and by they I mean the automotive companies, they're going to be behind on how they engage the public with this because they keep just waiting for someone else to solve the problem.
In a less sexy way, I would also argue that Hyundai Kia is worth mentioning there, primarily because the South Koreans are really the only other major player in the global battery race as well. The Chinese have won the global high voltage battery race, but the South Koreans have some real competitive players: LG Chem, Samsung SDI, SK Innovation. So again, like, it's not sexy and brand effective the way you mentioned like Tesla is, but the South Koreans really get the ecosystem of build batteries that go into cars, that go into energy storage, that go into a wide variety of applications. So
when I think that's a great point, because one of the other things I've found really interesting in all of this as automakers and everyone evolves is one of the big things before Tesla entered the space, or when DeLorean, you name it, through the history of automotive, a lot of they kind of said they were too big for other people to enter the space because it's so hard to make the engine, to have the suppliers and all of these really critical things of the powertrain to make a car. Making a metal box, that's kind of difficult, but people can do that. Building a platform that can actually drive around, do all this stuff, have the dealerships, it is definitely quite a hurdle. However, what I also find really interesting is over the last almost really since the 80s, but especially the 90s and the 2000s, there's been this huge acceleration with automakers kind of trying to sub out as much of that as possible. So whether it's making the engine, and so here's what's weird is like what they're becoming more and more and more is brands. And I think one of the big things that works really well for Tesla in this model, not that I want to sound super overly pro Tesla and all this stuff, but when you look at third-party reviews of who has the best consumer opinion of brands, lately
Tesla crushes everyone.
Tesla crushes everything, and then maybe Lexus shows up.
Yeah.
And so if you're an automaker and your big defensive thing, you're kind of getting rid of that, and you're trying to move more and more to be a marketing and brand play. And then with this evolution to EVs, they only seem to be accelerating it more and more with using LG. I guess it just seems so crazy to me from that long-term defensive thing without there to be more consolidation in the automotive space. And then on top of that, LG Chem's market cap isn't really that crazy. And everyone's kind of been complaining that there's a little bit of a demand issue, but then there's also production issues. I kind of would be surprised if VW or GM's oh, we'll just buy them for the defensive.
You could see it. You could
full on production.
I think the South Koreans
not to go on a crazy idea,
the South Koreans, I think, would only let another South Korean company do that because they recognize that batteries are the commodity of the future. So they have a massive strategic advantage because they have so much battery know-how. They already have factories set up all over the planet that are pumping out gigawatt hours a year, and they've got every automaker begging at their feet saying, I need more, I need more, I need more. So why would they get rid of that position? I
agree with that 100%. And honestly, one of the fun ways to look at this too is that, again, the whole thing about a motor and what has made automotive companies what they are forever is mechanical engineering. And they've been brilliant at it. And everything, you said it very well, Chase. It's just making a metal box, I mean, it's kind of hard, but it's not that hard. You can kind of do that part. Really, it fundamentally changes the heart and soul of what auto brands have been for ages. And at the end of the day, we've got think of an electric car kind of like a body. The heart of it is the battery. And so if you're not in that space and you're outsourcing that as best you can and letting somebody else who's an expert feed that into you, you're already behind. So that's number one.
Right.
Number two is the software is the nervous system. If your software is not brilliant and perfect and the UI, UX and integration of it is not,
you're not competitive.
You're not competitive. And then at the end of the day, the blood is the electricity that makes everything go. So if you're not understanding how to explain how that all works and have a consumer interact with your product that uses that, you're also toast. And so I look at all those three factors and I go, which legacy auto brands have figured those three things out?
The only thing further I would add to that, Matt, that was really well said. The only thing further I'd add to that is manufacturing operations as well. Sure. Just these, these factories are pretty much exclusively $250 million. Most are more than $500 million. Many of the really good ones are well over $1 billion. Yeah. And you just, that's hard. That's expensive. That's hard. You have to have some really technical people who are really smart and good at what they do. And, a player who is not involved in the EV space whatsoever right now, Toyota, I'd like to think that maybe they're going to die in the whole EV space. But at the same time, they're so damn good at manufacturing and they are so efficient and their margins are so good. I don't think Toyota makes any interesting automobiles, but they didn't become one of the biggest automakers on the planet for a reason. I mean, Porsche consulted Toyota on how to do better at their manufacturing, and Porsche has one of the strongest brands in the automotive sphere, on par with Tesla. I mean, people love their Porsches as much as people love their Teslas, and that manufacturing know-how came from Toyota. And so, I'm not pro Toyota by any stretch, but manufacturing.
The 2020 Camry is pretty sweet.
No, shut up.
I'm no accountant, but I'm blown away.
No, you're not. You're not. I have to admit, like the RAV4 Prime.
A friend of mine rented it, had a loaner one, and I was like surprised. I was like, "This is actually kind of a cool car." And he's like, "It's a Camry." He's like, and I literally burst out laughing. He's like, "No, it actually is." I was like, "Really?"
Well, but what you just said is actually a big part of the conversation. They're like, "Oh, he said it was a Camry," and I burst out laughing. This is the problem of the changeover of generational. Just expect what they see themselves as and what attaches to them. Right. Yeah. So I had posters of Dodge Vipers and Corvettes on my wall. That was my generation. I was like, that's a badass car. But my nephews and nieces and kids I know today, Tesla.
I know. That's what's crazy.
That speaks to their generation of like, this feels like it's my thing, not my dad's thing, not my uncle's thing, not my grandfather's thing. That's my brand. And that is honestly the biggest issue I think the brand element is going to have is that a lot of these legacy auto brands, they have a lot of equity and a lot of effort and a lot of everything invested into who they are as a brand and a company. And for them to just turn around and say no to that and start something fresh that could potentially invigorate a new generation into their products, that's a big thing for them to take on.
Well, and to that point, Matt, I have a hard time seeing some brands like Cadillac or Infiniti even surviving.
Yeah.
Oh, they're not going to survive.
Well, I think you look at what they're doing with Cadillac to be essentially their Tesla-ish division to start with. I mean, the business model makes sense.
Yeah.
But the branding and who it identifies with, I think it's generally an older generation who identifies with Cadillac.
Matt nailed this. Unless Cadillac builds a car that kids want to have posters of on their wall, they're doomed.
Yeah.
Just make an electric Eldorado.
Well, honestly,
the electric Hummer is coming, right?
That's yeah.
I will say that'll
be a true land yacht if it's as big as they say it is.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is
that would sell.
This whole discussion is exactly why I did that whole Jolt thing like 4 years ago, where I pretended Chevy made that electric sports car.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is why, is because we had to have a conversation about authenticity and excitement around what these brands are in the minds of people that are up and coming buyers. And that was the only reason I did that, was to prove and show that the narrative of saying, well, we build more electric cars, but no one wants them. It's like, yeah, but if you attached your brand to something that was actually badass, you'd probably be able to change people's perceptions about your brand. But the problem is they have a conflict of interest. And
that allows players like Rivian to come in and eat their lunch.
Totally. Yeah. Rivian is an exciting new thing. I mean,
totally.
It's unfortunate, but there's that Kodak moment that's going to happen to a lot of these legacy auto brands, which is they didn't transition into what was coming for transportation in a way that made their brands maintain relevancy.
Yeah.
No, and I think they're doing some really cool. It's kind of like what you said earlier about Tesla. Like when they first started, they kind of had their niche, the very Silicon Valley focus, and they've kind of honed it, made it a little more welcome. I wouldn't say more welcoming, but just easier to kind of align with the brand, understand the products.
Yeah.
And I think
Their sales have
Rivian's
certainly reflected that.
totally. And I think Rivian's done a really good job of finding that first niche. It's like, oh, do you buy Patagucci? Oh, well, we got a truck for you. You like going skiing? We got a truck for you.
Every wealthy Subaru owner is going to get a Rivian. Yeah. Mark my words.
Oh, well, honestly, I think Volvo is doing some cool stuff, but like in a lot of ways, there's a lot of kind of the Volvo old who used to buy Saab owners.
Polsters are cool. Volvo will make it.
Well, and honestly, because of even describing it, it's like, well, Polestar is to a lot of people, they're like,
I think it's a terrible name, but I get it.
But people are like, what is it? I've never heard of it. And then you see the product, you go, God, that's a good looking car. Yeah. It's like, oh, that thing's electric.
Totally.
Oh, wow. And then like ... Oh, P.S. it's Volvo. And they go, oh, whatever. I don't care. It's cool.
Yeah. No, but I think, like a lot of the brands we've just mentioned that are focused on being pure electric, Polestar, Rivian, Tesla, these are the brands that I think are poised for a lot of growth because they're making cool products that kick ass, that are exclusively electric. And like, again, name an Infiniti that's remotely interesting compared to these vehicles. You can't. I can't.
Yeah. No, it's funny because I still have so many friends in the automotive sector, and I'll see like releases about a new car, and they'll be sharing information about it on social media. And I just I see the release and I read through it. And I'm like, I feel like I'm reading something from 2002.
Yeah.
Like honestly, like why who cares? I mean, I went to the SEMA show for 18 straight years, and I finally got to a point where I was like, I'm really tired of seeing the exact same thing over and over and over. Yeah. I don't need to see that Nissan GTR painted purple, even though I knew it was blue last year. Who cares?
Well, it's kind of funny what we're also talking about too, because with like Rivian, they've just been hiring people to build out. I think they're calling it their adventure network. Yep. But it's their own version of supercharger network.
Hold up.
Or
it's actually
proprietary charging network, essentially.
Well,
I think they use the CCS.
It's going to be CCS, so non-Rivians will be able to use it. But they're
an automaker stepping up and kind of like building out the infrastructure to support. And I think they're doing it well with kind of their branding and the
they're pure electric. They're choosing first. They're pure electric. They're trying to do the ecosystem play. And if you have $3 billion worth of Amazon and Ford money, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, again, at the end of the day, if they don't figure that part out, I've had conversations with the team at Rivian as well. And at the end of the day, a lot of them know it. I mean, there's a lot of Tesla alums that are there. That if you don't answer the question about how do I use this thing again and again and again with confidence because the other product I need is fuel, then as beautiful and as great and as technologically cool as a Rivian might be, it just turns into a giant paperweight if you can't trust it. Yeah. And I mean, Tesla knew it. Rivian's showing that they're applying the same methodologies, and that's smart, especially to the adventure network being Moab or middle of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where you're going to want to take those things.
And it's giving a niche.
Yeah.
It's, kind of specializing where they're going with.
Yeah.
And I think that will help the conversation as well. If you can go off-road your EV truck in Moab or in Yosemite or insert national park here, then the conversation really changes of, okay, where can't you use an EV? Where doesn't it work?
Right. And I think, I mean, for them, a big part of it, it's same with how Tesla started, same really how all the famous traditional automakers, it's lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And so that's what Rivian's delved into. And that, I guess, to tail it back to my crazy idea earlier, the reason I say I don't think LG will, like, to me, the LG Chem thing is more like a hostile takeover. If you were like a business like a VW or GM, like it makes sense just to go straight to the resource if that's been your standout thing. I don't think. I think if I was them, I wouldn't sell.
Hyundai Kia is the only company that will have the opportunity to buy LG Chem or SK Innovation.
I don't know about that. I could easily see other. I mean, LG has a pretty wide division of all sorts.
No,
it's like it's same with like Panasonic and the.
I'm saying they're a South Korean company and they don't want to sell to anybody who's not South Korean. National interest.
I think I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. I think there's truth to it, but once again,
are you saying money talks essentially? I mean,
money talks, and I do think like. Once again, like hostile takeovers and like government interest have happened plenty of times. Yeah. It's a stretch. I still think it could happen. And like if GM or VW was serious, they'd really start looking at what they could do there. But I agree. It's more of a fun to think about than a reality.
Well, and they're all going to have to answer this question again. And a lot of them are investing into this space, but I think that they're
It's
learning
just
the
down the
hard.
infrastructure.
Well, I mean, infrastructure. What's interesting too is I was thinking about the Rivian element too. Is they're going to have a massive battery in those vehicles if you get the long
Totally.
range ones. Yeah. And even for the fast charging that those vehicles are going to be capable of,
That's exactly.
it's going to be. I mean, again,
It's a relatively low C coefficient.
Yeah. So
well, and I think that's what's so crazy about all these companies that keep saying they're going to roll out electric vehicles, and then I mean they look cool, but then they're going to have these massive battery packs, and they're already having issues making smaller cars with much smaller battery packs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the software.
The demand might be there for these bigger ones, but like to get that manufacturing capability up to ramp up more, I don't know.
Yep. Well, again, I think the goal that has to be proven out, and part of what we look at all the time with stakeholders we talk to is if you want to prove and show that people want EVs, you have to show that they can move them quick. And if you can show volume moves and it incentivizes them to build more, and they can't have the argument to say like, well, we build more, but no one wants them. If we can start showing that a lot of these old standing comments are dying off because we have the ability to say, nope, people are getting it and they want more. But then it gets down to what variety do you have? And brands like Rivian and Tesla and others will shine through because they are authentic in that sense. Yep. So
and you have the Volkswagens and the Hyundais who have the manufacturing capability as well. So
totally. It really some of the old guard all these different brands already out there, and it's just trying to figure out what brand identifies with someone more, whether it's the Porsche for the motorsport enthusiast, Tesla for the Silicon Valley guy, or the Toyota Camry for the accountant.
Yeah.
I think I realize we're also kind of coming up near probably the end for your guys' time here. I was just curious before we finally go if there was really any sort of if there's anything that either of you have kind of thought about that might be an innovative way or something just to do differently to really accelerate the industry, or even some sort of government incentive that could help the rollout of EVs. Is there anything that's really ever stood out to you guys, or you've seen work well?
Well, I mean, I was disappointed to see that we couldn't keep the federal tax credit for the brands that really help move EVs, being Tesla.
The early movers.
Yeah, and GM, frankly, they got screwed there too.
Totally, both of them did.
Yeah, and so I will say I come back to just keeping the conversation simple in the sense of what are we seeing from average people, and I still am for all the money that's been spent on trying to get awareness up and talk to people about products and everything else, I still think the wrong questions or the wrong solutions are being put out for questions that aren't being asked. People they understand what cars are, they don't know they have a fuel choice. We need to make it the UC Davis study to me shines a bright light on you can build as many charging stations as you want. But if consumers don't realize they can take advantage of it and they understand it with trust, they won't be buying the car that uses them. And so I think that is still, to me, one of the biggest hurdles out there. Because there's some damn good EVs out there that still sit on a lot for too long because dealers don't know how to sell them and consumers don't even know how to take advantage of them.
Yep. So. I have 2 points. One of them largely echoes Matt's piece surrounding marketing. And that's that there aren't enough advertising dollars spent on EVs. I don't watch TV or listen to the radio that often, but I can't tell you how many times I hear an ad for so-and-so dealership or, the new F1000. And I just don't hear that often for compelling EVs, which should change. Like just advertise cool products more, plain and simple. That will help sales. The other point I want to make here, actually come back to me on this, Chase.
Well, I think that totally makes sense where you come from, where just the awareness. I think it's always gonna be hard to advertise something that's kind of a meh product. Mm-hmm. So I think, and I think we're coming out with more and more great products that don't really require much advertising because people are finding out about them. Mm-hmm. And if you have that great product, it really is kind of, I guess I was going to say dump fuel on the flames, probably the wrong analogy, but like really accelerates what people are hearing about and what people are talking about. But and part of the reason I realize it's kind of an open and broad question, but part of the reason I ask is I hear a lot of times people ask like, well, what can government be doing or what can manufacturers be doing that's different? And I really think it's not that crazy of an answer. It doesn't really require, I think it's exactly what you just said, Matt, where it's really having just the right things in front of the right people and having that education. And if we can get to a 150 kilowatt fast charging more quickly and beyond, not farther beyond, it's going to make it a lot easier for everyone.
Well, I think the hard part too for automakers, the OEMs, is people always ask, like, why don't I see ads from GM or even Nissan or whomever about their EVs? And at the end of the day, they have relied on the fact that consumers, the early adopters, have been self-educating. And for them to invest any amount of money into marketing a product that they are not themselves capable of training their dealers to sell, they're not going to spend a penny on it. So that's just business. If they're like, niche product, yet we made it, we were mandated, ZEV, God, whatever, we'll put it in the market. And the dealers are like, yep, the people that show up here, they talk circles around us about these things. We don't know what to do. The automakers have just defaulted to that. But the problem they're now having is that EVs are becoming a mainstream conversation because of brands like Tesla, Rivian, and others. And so the expectation is that they can talk about it, but they still don't have a product that really competes. Most of them don't. But then still, they're just looking at it going, how do we talk about our brand differently? It's a car. It's a Porsche. It's a Chevy. How do we talk about ourselves differently? And that's because they don't sell fuel. They need somebody else to take that mantle.
Matt, you've created an entire business around simplifying a concept to make it easier to do something. The other thing that I was thinking of that would really help EV sales a lot is if you could make the federal tax credit a point of sale tax credit. You have to have people with large tax liabilities who are smart, are good at math, and understand the nuances of tax code to really fully take advantage of that. People like us have done it in many cases multiple times. Government's going to give you free money, I'll take it. But for a lot of people who, the difference of $7,500 at the point of sale for the car is the difference between them being able to afford it or not, even if they get it back when they file their taxes in January. If you could make that credit, and that's incredibly complicated to do. I'm not a tax professional. I don't propose to have a solution to this by any stretch. But if you could make the federal tax credit a point of sale tax credit, I guarantee that would bump EV sales 10 to 20% immediately.
I think how you position that is 100% right, because GM, that does not have it anymore, they've been giving $8,500 off Bolt at basically every dealership, and their volume of sales immediately peaked.
People have said that the Kona or the Niro is a better EV than the Bolt, and the Bolt is outselling it like crazy for exactly that reason.
Sure. Yeah. No, there's truth to the money talks element of like, but then it's the educational factor, right? It's like, the Niro charges faster than the Bolt. The Kona charges faster than the Bolt, but they're like, hey, I'll just take it because it's almost 10 grand off.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, sure, I'll figure out the charging later. I mean,
money talks. I mean, the Kona might be their second EV after they get rid of the Bolt in however many years, but GM does get a slice of the pie earlier.
No, and again, to the credit of that, it's moving more vehicles to the market. Used vehicles then get trickled down into used market. Then people that may not have bought a $40,000 EV can buy a $20,000 one.
Well, and I think that's kind of the issue I have with it is like I think EVs to really take off. Obviously, the money for brand new cars is great. It just doesn't translate well to where most cars are sold, and that's the used car market.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that California did with allowing EVs to be on the HOV lanes. Obviously, there's stipulations with that, but that means it's valid for all EVs. It's not you need a brand new one. And I think the more we can kind of, if government's going to play more and more of a role in it, I think it kind of needs to be more of those easier to implement carrot ideas versus the regulations, because it's just going to keep it being more politicized and take longer to really get all the stuff to the right people.
Bolt residuals have been super strong. I mean, like you're hard pressed to get a used Bolt that's really a better deal than a new one in some cases. So I do agree that just the more long range compelling EVs we have on the marketplace, the more they're going to be available to more people. But, they're Volkswagen and Hyundai are just now ramping up. But beyond that, it's just GM and Tesla. And those cars are still pretty expensive, even on the used market.
Oh, definitely.
People want them.
Exactly. Yep. And that to itself could be its own conversation. But I think at that point, if people are still listening to this, we're going to wrap it up. So I just want to say thanks to Matt and Wade for your time today and having these really interesting discussions.
Thanks for hosting, Chase.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening. Be sure to visit our website, connectingthegrid.com. There you can listen to our podcasts, Contact us about sponsorship or even be a guest on Grid Connections. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on your favorite podcast streaming service, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Thanks again, and I look forward to us learning more together soon.